Welcome to Brick Wall Busting, a case study. I'm Jim Long. As genealogists, we all have that one part of our family tree that we just can't break through. No matter where we look, how hard we try, we just can't break through one brick wall. Sometimes we're not using the right tools. We might be using a hammer and not know it, when what we really want to find is a mallet or a jackhammer or a bulldozer. Well, I've worked on one brick wall for many years and I finally busted through it, and I'll show you how I did it, and maybe you can learn some tools that you can use. Here's that part of my family tree that was a long time a brick wall. Here I am. This is on my dad's side through my grandmother, Emma Weekly. If you go back through my line through her great-grandparents, you'll see Robert Henry Weekly and Louisa Lewis. It's this Lewis family that was my brick wall for many years, and I finally figured out the brick wall, busted through it, and I want to show you how to do it too. As always, you should work from the known to the unknown. It doesn't make any sense for me to focus on this brick wall if I haven't sufficiently proven that she is actually my ancestor, that I've done my genealogical research correctly all the way down to me. So I've validated that, and I'm ready to work on this brick wall. So let me show you what I did. For Robert Weekly and Louisa Lewis, here's the last census in which they both appeared. It's the 1880 census for Montgomery County, Tennessee. And during this session, you'll see maps where I can kind of give you an idea of what geographical area I'm talking about. I'm using a basic hammer here, census records, but there is a good clue for me in this census record. It says that Louisa's father was born in Georgia. My family is generally from Tennessee, so Georgia is a good clue for me to be on the lookout for. Go back 10 more years to the 1870 census. I was surprised to find them over in Stewart County, Tennessee. This is not a family that I ever associated with that county. They've always been on the Montgomery-Cheatham County line to me. So I was surprised when I found this. I didn't know why this family was in Stewart County for a period of time. There's my direct line, George, age 11 in the 1870 census. But I know from the names and the ages of the children and the parents, this is the correct family. Go back 10 more years to the 1860 census. They're back where I expected to find them, northern Cheatham County. We see Robert and Louisa. We see her middle initial is T, which can be helpful. The youngest child in this family is my ancestor, George H. Weekly, age 1. Go back 10 more years, they essentially haven't moved, although they're in the Montgomery County census. The reason for that is that Cheatham County wasn't formed until 1856, so they stayed in the same place from 1850 to 1860. We see Robert and Louisa. My ancestor George has not been born yet. What I'll also point out to you here is that in 1850, Louisa, my brick wall ancestor, was 25 years old. Look at the ages of the other children in this household. She's too young to be their mother, except possibly that youngest child, age 11. But Louisa and Robert at this point had only been married for 5 years. So all of these children belong to Robert by a previous wife. I'll show you at last the marriage record I found in Montgomery County for this couple. Show you part of the original record here that says Robert H. Weekly to Louisa Lewis. Her maiden name here is spelled L-O-U-I-S. This is how I learned her maiden name, as we generally do from marriage records. Over here on the right we see the return of the person who performed the ceremony, John Perdue, Justice of the Peace, and he gives us the marriage date, 10th day of August, 1845. If you do find a marriage record where the marriage was performed by a justice of the peace, take an extra step to try to figure out what part of that county this justice lived in, because that will give you an additional clue as to where one or both of these people were living at the time of the marriage. In this case, John Perdue, Justice of the Peace in 1845, was in the southeast corner of Montgomery County, the part that would later become part of Cheatham County. One other item I found about her is I found her tombstone that gives wife of R.H. Weekly, but there is a problem here. It says Eliza on her tombstone. All of her census records say Louisa, yet her tombstone says Eliza. And when I found this, I wasn't quite sure what to do with that conflict. But the dates are correct. So I'll just have to think about Eliza and how I'm going to resolve that conflict. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. I never found an obituary for Louisa, no probate information, no death certificate. Death certificates didn't exist in 1890 in Tennessee. I allowed for the possibility that Eliza here was an additional wife of R.H. Weekly, who maybe he married after my Louisa had died, but I found no such marriage record for R.H. Weekly. And in fact, I don't even find him after 1880. So I think this is my Louisa. The graves around hers are all Louisa's children. So it makes no sense why they would have buried their stepmother here instead of their mother. But we'll see. So at this point, I've done a basic search with my basic hammer. I've found census records, marriage records, a tombstone, all great information, but they haven't so far helped me break through my brick wall of who were Louisa's parents. So my next focus is to try to find Louisa's family. I'm going to look for her parents, and I'm going to start with Montgomery County, where she was married in 1845. I'm going to look at basic tools like census records, wills, and probates. I'm going to try a little more advanced tool, as I show with the mallet here. Land records and tax records can help us break through brick walls. I decided to start with the 1850 census, looking for Lewis's in the vicinity of Montgomery County, Tennessee, allowing for all of the adjacent counties. Here's the list that I initially came up with of people that I needed to search for. It's interesting that none of these are in Montgomery County. Also, I note this person at the bottom has a birthplace of Georgia. That's of great interest to me based on that clue from Louisa's 1880 census record that her father was born in Georgia. I'm also intrigued by this Stewart County, Tennessee match, since that's a place where Robert and Louisa had lived for a period of time. For each of these people, I have a lot of research to do with my basic hammer. Each of these record types that we often use in genealogy, I've got to use for every one of these people. I've got to learn who they were, who their family was, see if there's a place for my Louisa in these families. It's not easy, it's not quick. It will take you to many counties, many records, many courthouses or archives or libraries. It's just legwork that you just have to do to find your family or rule out people as being part of your family. There was a family close to where I had found Louisa and Robert living, a Lewis family that lived in the southwestern part of Robertson County, close by a part that later became Cheatham County, but I was able to document that family well. They had moved to Illinois even before Louisa was married, and it didn't make sense to me that she would stay behind when the entire rest of the family moved to Illinois, so I discounted those. After the end of all of this search, and this took me a long time, years working off and on for it, I had not found a good candidate for Louisa's parents. But I did find one good clue in this search. Over in Stewart County, Tennessee, I found a marriage record for a Joseph J. Weekly and a Mary Ann Lewis, 1853, 8 years after Robert and Louisa had married. Joseph J. Weekly is someone who I was already familiar with. He is a son of my Robert Weekly by his first wife. So 8 years after Robert marries a Lewis, his son also marries a Lewis. Is it a coincidence? I need to explore the possibility that this Mary Ann Lewis may be related to my Louisa. So for now, I have a loose connection between this Mary Ann Lewis and Louisa. I need to explore that connection. And this got me thinking about if she's a sibling of Louisa, then a technique that I should use is to trace the siblings of my ancestors, not just my direct line. In the example for Louisa, I descend through their son George H. So let's look at George's siblings for clues that might help us find Louisa's family. 4 of my ancestor George's siblings lived long enough to have death certificates, and I show you those here. It's interesting to see that for the father's name, we have consistently Robert as the father of all 4 children, like we would hope. One of the records has a middle name for him, Henry. This is the only record that I've ever found that has his middle name shown as Henry. For mother, look at what we have. Eliza Lewis. There's that Eliza. Liza Lewis. Eliza Lewis. Very consistent pattern here of Eliza, which matches the tombstone I have found. The 4th certificate says Eliza, and that doesn't say Lewis. It looks to me like it says TENN as an abbreviation for Tennessee. So I don't know if this is a mistake on the clerk's part where they wrote Tennessee here instead of here. But Louisa's middle initial was T, so maybe her middle name was Tennessee. I don't know, but that's an interesting clue there. Regardless, we have 4 death certificates. It's important to remember that death certificates were not filled out by the person who knew the correct answer. These were not filled out by Louisa or Eliza's children, but by her children's survivors. So you can't take all of this information to the bank, but they're great clues, right? These clues, at least 2 of these, say that Eliza or Louisa was born in Stewart County, a place I had already made a general search for my Lewis family. I found that great clue from the Stewart County marriage records, and since I'm focused at this point in my search on siblings, I need to go back to Montgomery County and look at research at marriage records there. It's also helpful in tracing the siblings to look for descendants of those siblings who may have figured all this out and save you some time. But I'm going back to Montgomery County marriage records to look for potential siblings of Louisa Lewis Weekly. In Montgomery County marriage records, just 2 years after Robert Weekly and Louisa Lewis married, I found a marriage record for Hiram Lewis to Amanda Harriet Robinson, and the bondsman on that marriage record was Robert H. Weekly. So just 2 years after Robert married a Lewis woman, he's the bondsman for a Lewis man. Remember that in Tennessee, the marriage bond was a $1,250 bond. That didn't mean it cost that much to get married. Your bond was your word. So this was a promise by the groom under penalty of $1,250 that he was about to enter into a valid marriage. And the bondsman was usually someone who was willing to suffer the potential penalty of $1,250 with you. So it wasn't a complete stranger. So there was already some relationship between Hiram Lewis and Robert H. Weekly at the time of this marriage. I found another record. In 1854, a marriage for Hiram Lewis to a Martha Kane. This time, the wedding was performed by Robert H. Weekly as Justice of the Peace. So we have what may be the same person involved in 2 different marriages in Montgomery County with a man who had married a Lewis. Great clues, but I found one more. A marriage in 1856 between A.R. Lewis and Fredonia Edwards. Robert H. Weekly was the bondsman on that marriage, and he also performed the ceremony. So I consider these 3 marriage records that I found to be jackhammers. They're going to be quite effective in busting down this brick wall. So now I have A.R. Lewis and Hiram Lewis, both with connections somehow to Louisa through her husband, R.H. Weekly. It's time to go try to find what else I can find out about these 2 new Lewis leads. I'm going to focus on the counties where I have found these people already, Cheatham, Montgomery, and Stewart counties. When I look for Hiram Lewis with my basic hammer, I found quite a few records on him. In Stewart County, 1844, he was a voter. In 1847, I showed you that he had married in Montgomery County. In 1852, 5 years after that marriage, his wife Amanda sues for divorce because he's been gone for 2 years. In 1854, I showed you he was back in Montgomery County, marrying a second time. 1855, he's back in Stewart County, paying taxes and voting. 1856 through 58, he's back in Montgomery County paying taxes. He's in the part of Montgomery County that would become Cheatham County in 1856. 1860, back in Stewart County, paying taxes over there again. And finally, 1861, Cheatham County, his second wife Martha sues for divorce because he's been gone for 2 years. So Hiram's all over all these 3 counties, leaving 2 wives behind so far. This timeline does suggest that we are talking about the same Hiram Lewis and not 2 different people. You can see there that we don't have Hiram Lewis in 2 different places at one time. So another great tool when you're busting brick walls is to use a timeline to prove where someone was living and to resolve any conflicts that may arise in the data that you find. When searching for A.R. Lewis in the same 3 counties, I found him as well. I showed you his marriage record in 1856. 1857-58, he's paying taxes in Stewart County in the same district where we found Hiram. 1858, Albert R. Lewis is a member of Liberty Baptist Church, same district where Hiram was living. 1859, A.R. Lewis is in the Cheatham County tax list in that northern section of Cheatham County. 1860, we see him in the census, age 28. His wife Fredonia is there, as well as their 2 oldest children, John and George. We see for the first time how old Albert R. Lewis was, born about 1832. We see the first 2 sons, and I'm going to keep in mind this John name because oftentimes the eldest son was named after a grandparent. So I'm just going to tuck that back in my brain and be on the lookout for a John Lewis. Finally, in 1863, I found a record where Albert R. Lewis was excluded from his church for moving away without a letter. So this tells me that I'm looking for an Albert R. Lewis born about 1832 in Tennessee. Since he didn't get married until 1856, I should have found him in the 1850 census, still single, presumably still living with his parents. And I didn't find him in any of these counties, so I broadened my search a bit. I found an Albert R. Lewis, right age, 18 in 1850, born in Tennessee, living in Independence County, Arkansas, White River Township. I'll show you the location of that township here on this inset of Arkansas. In the house is a John Lewis, age 59, born in South Carolina. The ages there are suggestive of John being Albert's father. And South Carolina reminds me of that Georgia hint that I got from Louisa's 1880 census record. So I think if this is my Albert R. Lewis that I've been looking for, and he's got the right name and the right age and the right birthplace, then I've just found his father. And his oldest son is named John, which all makes sense as well. I may have also found more siblings that I need to follow up on, a Nancy, a William, and a James. But if this is my Albert R. Lewis, who I am theorizing is a brother to my Louisa, then what caused him to move back to Tennessee? This is 1850, 6 years before he married, so something caused him to come back to Tennessee. But in the meantime, I have found a John Lewis that I need to search for here in Independence County, Arkansas. So I've plugged him into the map here to show that John Lewis has a good connection between the 3 children shown in that census record. And Albert, of course, has some connection to Louisa. So you can see how I'm starting to show relationships among some of these siblings and a potential father. Looking for John Lewis in Independence County, Arkansas, I did find a John Lewis and a James Lewis in the 1851 and 52 tax lists for Independence County, and remember that James was one of the sons shown in that 1850 household. But I don't find any other records on this family in this county around this time period. I use the word disappear, which I generally hate because as genealogists, when we say someone disappeared, that's usually an indication that we haven't done our due diligence in looking everywhere for the records that will tell us what actually happened to them. I do note here that Albert R., who led me to Independence County in the first place, is too young to appear in tax records at this time. He would not yet have been 21 years old. But something I know took Albert back to Tennessee for marriage, and since I had found him in Stewart County, I decided to go back to Stewart County, but do a little harder digging. I've pulled out my jackhammer this time. I'm going to look in court minutes. Court minutes are hard records to use because they're usually unindexed. They take a long time, and you just have to read page by page, hoping to find something. But I found something. In 1852, this would be after Albert had disappeared from Arkansas, Albert R. Lewis is appointed to a road crew along with an Isaac W. Lewis. Road crews were appointed based on neighborhoods. So this tells me by 1852, Albert R. is back in Stewart County, and he's living in the same neighborhood as an Isaac W. Lewis. So now I may have an additional sibling that I need to research. In 1854, another road crew assignment, including Albert, Wesley Lewis, who I'm thinking may be Isaac Wesley, as well as yet another potential sibling, a James W. Lewis. But remember that 1850 census from Arkansas that I showed, Albert had an older brother named James. So this is all meshing together that something happened that caused Albert and James, at least, to come back from Arkansas. Continuing to read court minutes, I found what I had been hoping to find. In 1853, L.D. Hargis was appointed guardian to Albert R. Lewis and Mary A.E. Lewis, minor heirs of John Lewis, deceased. What a great entry to find in court minutes. It tells me John Lewis, their father, is deceased by 1853, which explains why he disappeared from Independence County, Arkansas. It also tells us that Albert R. Lewis and Mary A.E. Lewis are now living in Stewart County, where this guardianship was set up, and it tells us that they are minors. It tells us they're under 21 years old. If there had been other siblings under 21 years old, presumably they would also be listed in this guardianship. So it tells us that Albert and Mary were the two youngest children of John Lewis and that John was deceased. This I have found a bulldozer to help me break down this brick wall. Now, back to my map, I can show a strong connection between John, Albert, and Mary. They are his children. I've also found a loose connection from the road crew information between Albert and a new sibling Isaac, and that James that we had already seen with Albert in John's 1850 household. Signs keep pointing to Stewart County, Tennessee, so it sets up a potential migration pattern where they were in Montgomery or Cheatham, moved west to Stewart, and on to Arkansas. After John died, the children came back to Stewart County. But this suggests that John himself was at one time in Stewart County. So I decided to make a focused search in Stewart County records for this John Lewis. And I found him. In 1837, he purchased some land in District 7. 1838, there's a marriage record between John Lewis and a widow named Annie Outland. 1839 and 40, John is paying taxes on the land that he's purchased. In the 1840 census in Stewart County, John is aged 40 to 50, which is what we would expect for the same guy we found in Arkansas. There's wife Annie, a widow, a little bit older than John. There are 6 males in the household and 3 females. And that allows us to plug in every one of the suspected siblings that I'm working with so far. When you're working with these early census records and those tick marks, you always hope to find more tick marks than you need, not fewer. If I found only one female, then I couldn't have both Louisa and Mary Ann in the household at that time. But there were 3 females, so I actually have potentially other siblings in there that I may not yet know about. In 1840, John Lewis was sued in circuit court by William Gower and Mark Gower for debts owed. He had borrowed money from them, which suggests that he may have known them, and I may need to be on the lookout for the Gower surname. In 1841, John Lewis executed a trust deed to Thomas Phelan to secure a debt that he had made to Elizabeth Gatlin. So he had borrowed money from Elizabeth, but rather than be beholden to her, he convinced Thomas Phelan to pay off the debt so that John would be beholden to Mr. Phelan. This suggests a strong relationship between Mr. Phelan and Mr. Lewis. Because why would Phelan get in the middle of this debt unless he had some connection to John Lewis? But very least a close friend, a neighbor, and possibly even a kinsman. So Phelan is another surname that I need to be on the lookout for. In 1841, the land that John had purchased was sold to pay the debt that he had owed to the Gowers. By 1848, he's still in the county, but just voting, no longer on the tax list. 1850, he is not in the 1850 Stewart County census, and it's important to make that check because I'm going on a theory that this is the same guy who in 1850 was in Independence County, Arkansas. If I had found him in both places, that would suggest I'm dealing with two different people, but since I only found him in one place, my theory is still holding up that this is all the same person. Something was amiss here, however, because this second wife, Annie, that he had married in 1838 and who was living with him in 1840, she's not with him in that 1850 Arkansas census. She is in Callaway County, Kentucky, which is just west of Stewart County here, living with one of her or two of her outland children. So that suggests that there has been some sort of separation between John and Annie Lewis. I looked in Stewart County and found no evidence of a divorce. It's possible that after she moved to Callaway County, Kentucky, that Annie obtained a divorce from John there. I found no evidence of that, however. Now it's time to get out a bigger tool. I've so far been using my basic hammer, census, marriage, tax lists, court minutes, voting records, but one of my favorite mallets to use are loose records. You can find things in loose records that you're not going to find anywhere else. So for the two debts that John Lewis had incurred, resulting in two court cases by the Gowers, I have found at the Stewart County Archives the notes that John Lewis signed when he executed those debts. And both debts were 1829, if you can see the notes there. And I also have original signatures on these notes. This is John Lewis's signature. Anytime you find a signature, save a copy of it. It will help you solve problems, as we will see. There's nothing in these Stewart County records that I found for John, however, that tie him to any of these siblings that I have talked about and theorized in some case. So I next went back to Arkansas records to execute a broader search. I had already looked in Independence County, Arkansas for John and didn't find him, but maybe I would find records with a broader search in Arkansas that I had not yet done. In 1862, I find that Albert R. Lewis had purchased 160 acres in Jackson County, Byrd Township, and I show you that it was just a few miles east of where Albert had been in the 1850 census with John. In 1862, I find Hiram again. 10th of August, he enlists in the Arkansas Cavalry. He says his birthplace was Davidson County, Tennessee. What a great new clue. And for the first time, I get an idea of how old Hiram was, because I have his age at the time of enlistment. 16 days later, after Hiram enlisted, Albert R. Lewis enlisted in the same company of the same regiment, also listing birthplace of Davidson County, Tennessee. So here we have a strong connection between Albert and Hiram. Albert Lewis was killed just a little over a year into his service at Cassville, Missouri. Hiram survived the war. He was discharged in 1865 while in hospital in Memphis. In 1868, while living in Jackson County on the land that Albert had purchased, Albert's widow Fredonia Lewis applied for a widow's pension from the government. Hiram Lewis gave an affidavit in that pension application. He didn't say my brother Albert, unfortunately, but what he did say was that he was present at the birth of every one of Albert's children. A strong connection between Albert and Hiram. In 1870 census, Jackson County, Arkansas, Hiram is living there, born in Tennessee as we would expect to see. Albert's widow, Fredonia, is living there as well. with two of their children. The oldest child, John, seems to have died by 1870. So we have now a strong connection between Albert and Hiram, both of whom involved R.H. Weekly in their marriages in Montgomery County. So at this point, I'm convinced that Albert and Hiram are brothers. I've also got that great new clue of that they were both born in Davidson County, Tennessee. So it's time to go to Davidson County to find their father, their presumed father, hopeful father, John Lewis. I do find the 1830 Davidson County census a John Lewis of the right age. I see a wife that's just a little younger than he was. Remember, at this time he was not yet married to that Annie Outland that we saw in Stewart County. There's room in this household for the two oldest sons, William and Hiram, as well as possibly an extra one. The two younger sons, James and Isaac. Albert is not yet born in 1830. There's also room in this household for Louisa. Mary Ann is not yet born. So this is another case where we have enough tick marks for this to fit the family that I have proposed to put together right now. John, a wife, sons, and daughter Louisa. 10 years earlier, I find the same family. John is 10 years younger, the wife is 10 years younger, and there are two males in the family, William, who appears to be the oldest, and then a second son. It's possible that son is Hiram because Hiram was born about 1820. But nevertheless, I have enough tick marks for it to also fit with the family that I'm proposing to put together. In the Davidson County Archives, I got out my big mallet and I found an 1817 marriage bond signed by John Lewis to marry a woman named Farabee Feeling. Look who the bondsman was on that marriage bond. Thomas W. Feeland, the same man who in 1841 had signed that trust deed with John Lewis over in Stewart County. So there was a connection between these gentlemen. It sets up to be, even though her name is spelled Feeling and his Feeland, is that Farabee Feeland, the woman that John Lewis was about to marry, was a sister of Thomas W. Feeling. So they were both going on the bond for this marriage in 1817. We see John Lewis's original signature there, which is a wonderful thing to see. Since I found John's signature already at the Stewart County Archives, I can now compare all three signatures. And in my unprofessional opinion, they are the same signature. I've proven that the John Lewis who married in 1817 to Farabee Feeland is the same one who appeared with the Feeland family over in Stewart County in the 1830s. This is my bulldozer to knock down that brick wall. I now have John and Farabee connected to two of their children solidly. I've connected the dots from that child to that child. I've connected some of these other children to each other. I show you also another connection here between James and Isaac Lewis. Their descendants lived in the same neighborhood in Stewart County for generations and still live there. I show you these siblings arranged in birth order as best I can determine. There's room for my Louisa right there in the middle, and her presence is supported by the 1830 and 1840 censuses prior to her marriage. So now I am pleased to have removed this brick wall from my chart, proudly replaced by John Lewis and Farabee Feeland. I can now begin to explore those surnames, looking forward to my next brick wall. As a reminder of some of the tools that I've talked about here, work from what you know to what you don't know. Use new sources in old places. Get out that mallet in a county you've already been looking for, and read court minutes, for example, and try to find those records. Be prepared for new places. I found Albert Lewis all the way over in Arkansas when I had no clue that the family ever went to Arkansas, but I didn't rule out the possibility that it was him, followed up on that record, and was able to prove that it was him. Find siblings. I love this technique for breaking brick walls. If you can't find your ancestor Look at their siblings if you know them, and if you don't know them, try to figure out who the siblings were, because they will collectively help you break down that brick wall. Build timelines for everybody that you work on, because you will see places you need to go, times you need to research in. It will also help you resolve conflicts if you find records for the same named individual in two different places at the same time. I'll also point out that after I had come to this conclusion to my satisfaction from a genealogical research standpoint, that I looked at the DNA, and I show you a snippet here. My father tested with Ancestry DNA, and using their timeline feature, I'm at least able to confirm that my line here, Louisa, I am matched genetically to descendants of Albert R. Lewis, who is her brother. I'm also connected to descendants of her sister, Mary Ann Lewis, but remember that Mary Ann married a Weekly, so that I can't use that as a proof of the Lewis connection. On the Phelan side, my ancestor Farabee Phelan is where I descend, but I also have matches to one of her siblings. So I proved it to my satisfaction with genealogy, and the DNA backs that up. I hope you have appreciated this talk about busting brick walls. I hope I've showed you some new tools and how to use them to bust through your brick walls. Good luck.